about ready to go. I'm also going to be recording this, as I said, and we can get started. I think we've given everybody, and people will still be trickling in as we continue. But again, good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kelsey. I'm the events coordinator at Tombolo Books. And on behalf of the whole staff and crew over there at Tombolo, we just thank you for joining us and being a part of this event. If you're unfamiliar with Tombolo or where we're located, we're in the Grand Central District of St. Petersburg. So if you are in the St. Petersburg area, we would love for you to come down and visit us. We've opened up to do 6 days a week. We're doing scheduled shop-in. So you can schedule a time and you come in and shop for 45 minutes. So that's happening 6 days a week, every day except for Mondays. We also have online buying, of course, so you can, if you're not in the St. Petersburg area, or if you're not even in Florida, you can shop with us online. You can get those 2 books that we mentioned, books that Jon co-wrote that accompany this event tonight. Or if you are still in the St. Petersburg area and you'd rather do some curbside service, we do no contact curbside service as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists tonight, which I am so grateful that everyone gave their time. Jon, Gwen, Nicole, generously giving their time to be with us this evening. We're so excited to have all of them. So with us tonight is Gwendolyn Reese, who is the president of the African American Heritage Association of St. Petersburg. And she serves on the St. Petersburg Community Planning and Preservation Commission and co-chairs the Community Remembrance Project Coalition, Pinellas Remembers. So I'm gonna stop right there with your bio, because I know that that's going to be a lot of what you're going to talk about in this event right here, is all of those really amazing, wonderful positions that you hold and what's going on with all of those things. And then we also have John Wilson, who is a native of Scottsbluff, and he moved to St. Petersburg with his family. He attended local schools. He was a reporter, editor for the St. Petersburg Evening Independent and the St. Petersburg Times for 37 years. And then he was a communications consultant for the Florida Humanities Council. And now Jon also works with Gwen at the American Heritage Association and is the author of co-author of the 2 books that we spoke about, or we had linked up in the description of the event today, St. Petersburg Historic 22nd Street South and St. Petersburg African American Neighborhoods, which are 2 really wonderful volumes that highlight a very important part of St. Petersburg's history. And our moderator tonight is one of Tombolo's very own, Nicole Slaughter-Graham, who also works very closely with Gwendolyn and Jon. And so I'm gonna let Nicole take it away, and she is going to facilitate this wonderful conversation that we have for you all this evening.
Thank you. I just want to say hi first to everybody, and I am really excited that you all are here. This is great. And I just want to kind of get right to it, because there's a ton that we could talk about, and I want to make sure we talk about as much as possible. Okay, so Miss Gwen and Jon, I just want to lay it out a little bit for you so you know where we're going. I'm going to read a little bit from African American Neighborhoods. And then there's someone, you guys might have noticed that we said that Jon was a co-author of these books. And so I want to talk a little bit about the other author as well. And then we'll move into kind of current events, what's going on now. We'll talk about the books a little bit first, and then we'll move on to current events and what's happening in the African American community and St. Pete at large and how it all goes together. So in the book, St. Petersburg's Historic African American Neighborhoods, which is this one, I'm going to read from chapter 8 called How Much Remains. And this will get us started. Peppertown is gone. Methodist Town is gone, except for its old churches. The gas plant neighborhoods are gone, replaced by Tropicana Field and its sprawling parking lot. Much of the 22nd Street South community is gone, although the city government in the early 21st century continues to work hard to rehabilitate the once thriving corridor. The redevelopment in those neighborhoods changed the appearance of St. Petersburg and the lives of the people who lived in them. In many cases, former residents were able to move into better housing. Some suggest that their old neighborhoods had tumbled into the abyss of illegal drugs and the crime that comes with them, and that change was for the better. At the same time, the change disrupted the continuity of people's lives. Gas plant redevelopment caused 285 buildings to be bulldozed, more than 500 households, and 9 churches had to be relocated, and more than 30 businesses moved or closed. And I just read those first few paragraphs because I think, first of all, like now, as St. Pete continues to grow and as development continues, and we have RFPs on Tropicana Field, and we have developers looking at 22nd Street South, now is really a special time for us to have this conversation. And so that's just one of the chapters in this book, which chronicles the 4 prominent African-American neighborhoods in St. Petersburg that were built and maintained and thrived before desegregation. And so I also want to talk about Miss Rosalie Peck, who is John Wilson's co-author. So Miss Gwen and John, I would love for you to tell us a little more about Miss Rosalie.
Gwen, you want to? Okay, well, I met Rosalie on 22nd Street during a meeting of the 22nd Street Neighborhood Association, or perhaps the District Business Association. And I, at the time, was working on a special report for the Times about the 22nd Street neighborhood. I heard Rosalie speak and read a poem, and I thought I must talk to her, and did. And she became a very important source for the report that the Times published. After that, she said, "Hey, you want to write a book?" And I said, "Sure, let's get going." And so we collaborated on that 22nd Street South book. Great person, just wonderful. I sat at her feet for hours and listened to the stories that she would tell about growing up in the neighborhood.
And I think I met Rosalie, and I didn't call her Rosalie. I called her Mrs. Peck. Oh no, Mrs. Swain. She was married to Bob Swain when I first met her, and I was in junior high school. So I sort of grew up under this tree that was Rosalie, that just branched out everywhere, and it was so beautiful, and it just provided so much shade and comfort to so many people. And then she disappeared from my life for a while. She actually moved out of the country, and she came back when my son and daughter were in high school. And we reconnected, and that's when I started calling her Rosalie, because she went to being a very, very, very good friend. And we would talk every Sunday morning on the phone over coffee. That was our church. For me and Rosalie, that was our church. And we would talk about everything: love, history, sex, life, racism, whatever it was, we talked about it. That was the kind of relationship we had. As she became ill and moved into went into hospice, I became closer and closer with her. But I thank her because I met John through Rosalie. And John and I then developed a wonderful friendship that's actually centered around our love of Rosalie. And the poem that John talks about, usually when you take a tour, I read that poem to you. And so she was just a great woman, and she's still alive in us through her book. She has so much hope and optimism for 22nd Street. And so I think about her often when I look at the progress that's taking place on the Deuces.
Miss Gwen, would you mind reading that poem for us? Do you have it handy?
Yes, because I have the book handy.
Right, I thought you did.
So,
good question. That's great.
So yes, I will. It's entitled Remembering 22nd Street the Way We Were, a poem by Rosalie Peck. Good bands came to St. Petersburg then. Great music filled the hall. Manhattan Casino, home of happy feet. Oh yes, We had a ball. Count, Duke, Cab and Buddy, Erskine, Jimmy Lunsford, Louis Armstrong, and Father Hines, B.B. King, Tiny Bradshaw, Fats Waller, Clyde McFadden, Ike, and Tina Turner, so fine. Otis Redding, Bill Doggett, Lucky Melinda, Cootie Williams, Ray Charles, and Louis Jordan, too. George Cooper, Manzi Harris, Alvin Downing, Al Williams and the Versatiles, Dizzy Gillespie, and the Drifters who carried on till the night was through. Remember Arthur Prysock, Buddy Johnson's sister Ella, Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan? Remember William Dandy, Louise Levine, Elsie McGarrett, and Frank Royal blowing his horn? Remember Joe Williams doing his thing? If you were there, you do. If not, I'm here to tell you. Great musicians thrilled us through and through. Musicians who couldn't be beat played for us when life was sweet on 22nd Street. On 22nd Street, we dressed up so fine as if not a care in the world. We strolled on Easter Sunday, Tuesday, or Monday. We strolled just any old time. On 22nd Street, where Black businesses thrived, where great leaders worked, played, lived, and died. On the south side of town, way out in the country, where plenty Black pride was found. Remember Geach's barbecue? Because there is no doubt in it, everybody who had a taste knows it made your brains fall out. And what about fine restaurants, good home cooking, served fresh and neat? Remember all the good places where we could go to eat on 22nd Street? The Harlem Renaissance, the Rendezvous, the Moonlight, Newkirk's, and Snow Peak too. Romel's, the Spot. Yes, there were quite a few, all right there for the pleasure of me and you. That was 22nd Street. We had doctors, lawyers, tailors, and barbers for you. We had the Royal Theater, the Royal Hotel too, Mercy Hospital, pharmacies, grocery stores too, soda fountain, shoe repair. And when life was through, there was even a well-established funeral home to bury you. All of this flourished in a neighborhood where Black families lived, worked, prayed, and died, teaching children to be good. Yes, the heart of this community was 22nd Street. Life was the soul of this one great street. Like downtown Central Avenue, it was the place to meet and greet. But then one day the interstate came, wiped out our history and changed everything. But remember the name 22nd Street, for like the phoenix, one day it too may rise. It will never be the same, but before our very eyes, it may breathe life again. It may survive and surprise. Like an oak with the tap root, it may refuse to die. 22nd Street might still rise up to defy and take its rightful place once more, serving good people of St. Petersburg once more under God's clear blue spacious skies. Remembering 22nd Street.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
A lot of words have been written about 22nd Street, but Rosalie encapsulated that history
Yes.
in a 5-minute reading there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
she really did. She really did. John, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about how we know you met Miss Rosalie for an assignment for the Times, and you went and wrote these books, or helped, co-authored these books. Why did this project become so important to you?
Well, I'm a journalist and a very amateur historian. And so not only did I meet Rosalie, but at the time, the Job Corps building was being built on 22nd Street and 5th Avenue South. And so people who had lived there for their lifetimes, 20, 30, 40 years, were being moved out of their homes to make room for the Job Corps thing. And so I went there to talk to some of the people. and listen to their stories and realize that, my goodness, here is a whole rich vein of St. Petersburg history, a story of people who have persevered through generations, and this one little corner is getting away. And so the time I did a couple of stories on that for the Times, and then combined that with meeting Rosalie. I was just fascinated with the area. I had grown up in St. Pete during the segregation era. I never talked to a person of color until I was 21 years old and in the United States Army. And so to me, this became a project that I was able to embrace, not only professionally, but in my heart as well. Just talking and learning about the folks there. Probably a long-winded answer, but maybe that answers the question about why it was so important to me.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. To date, as far as we know, these books are the two most comprehensive records that we have on the African American community in St. Petersburg. We are grateful for them, of course, but at the same time, I wonder if it's enough. And I wonder that knowing the answer, which it's not. Miss Gwen, you always talk about the importance of telling your story and the importance of the Black community telling their story. Can you talk about that a little bit for me?
You know, I'm not sure where I was traveling, and I saw this little plaque, and it's sitting over here, and it says, your stories. Your stories are beautiful, they're complicated, they're messy, and they must be told. And I purchased that because it said everything that I felt. I was born and raised here, delivered by a midwife in a house at 1300 Upton Court that sat right behind Mercy Hospital. I've lived my life here by choice. There were many times I thought I wanted to get away from here. And then I realized, why would I take my energy somewhere else to make another city better, stay at home and work to improve my city? There's so many stories that are not told. And you're right, Nicole, there are other books that need to be written. Jon is writing one now. And as you know, I've been, I'm going to say coerced, but voluntarily coerced to write a book as well. So I will be writing a collection of stories about the gas plant neighborhood. And Jon is writing a much needed story about the lynching of John Evans. But there is so much about the African American community that people don't know, not even African Americans who were born and raised here. Because if you don't research and look for it, if it's not important to you, you won't find it because it's not documented and recorded in most books. And that's why Jon and Rosalie's books are so precious and so important to us as a community, not a Black community, but to a community at large, for you to understand the rich heritage and history and the important roles that we played here in this city. St. Petersburg could it, Jon, be St. Pete if it wasn't for the Black workers who came and built the Orange Belt Railway? I mean, so Absolutely. We have been a part of this city since 1868, when the first African American came here. Most people don't know that. When people talk about the pioneers of St. Petersburg, they don't include Elder Jordan and John Donaldson, two Black pioneers. So these stories have to be told. They have to be written. I am a storytelling historian. I am a griot in the African tradition. I hold it within me and I tell it in the form of stories. And that is the only label that I allow people to give me, is a griot for my community, because that's important. And I will tell these stories until the day I die. And hopefully there will be someone else in the African tradition who will take it up and continue to tell the stories. These stories must be told.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think now more than ever, they must be told too, because our city is really on the precipice of transforming again. It's kind of in the middle of it, but there are some key things going on right now that could be greatly influenced by whether or not our city takes these stories seriously.
Yes.
And so I kind of want to segue into the African American Heritage Trail.
Okay.
So I'd love you both to kind of talk to me about the African American Heritage Trail and how it got started. And I wish we could all go on a trolley tour together, but we cannot, so I'm sorry. But you can do a walking tour. But I would love to just tell me how that trail got started and how you both got involved with it.
But before we do that, Nicole, I want to say to everyone, thanks to Nicole and two partnerships we're developing. Very soon, we will have a virtual tour that you can take online, an application. And because of Nicole, it's going to be fantastic. And you'll hear more than my voice and John's voice. You'll hear voices from the community. I'm going to start this, how it gets started, and then I'm going to give it over to John. It started with Mayor Bill Foster, who came to me and said, Gwen, every time I go to a wake in the Black community, I hear these incredible stories and we never hear them again. Is there some way we can gather these stories? Would you help me? And I said, I don't know how we'll do it, but this touches my heart. Yes, I will. And so sent out some emails to people. John was one of the first ones who said, yes, I'm on it. And a group of volunteers came together, and we're still volunteers to this day. And we thought we were going to produce a brochure, didn't we, John?
Yeah, that was the initial goal.
That's all we were going to do. But all the information that came in, the stories, I was like, we can't stop here. We don't know where we're going, but we know we have to do more than this. And Kim Hinder is on this call. I saw her. Kimberly worked for the city along with Amy Angel, and they were our angels within the Historic Preservation Department. They adopted this, they loved this, they dedicated their time to it, overtime, after time, before time. We could not have done it without them. They actually wrote the $50,000 grant to the state of Florida that gave us the money to be able to create this trail. So y'all just give Kimberly a shout out, raise your hand, clap your hands, whatever you want to do. We couldn't have done it without her. So John, you take it from there. What else happened?
Well, after we got the basic organization down, we started meeting at City Hall, I believe about every week.
Yeah.
For a long time. We would meet for maybe 2 hours. I think the core group consisted of about a dozen people. And again, Kim Hinder and Amy Angel were the heart and soul of that. And the more information we got, the more excitement was generated. And I think we just loved the project. Don't you, Gwen? It did not seem as if it was work by any means. This was something that I think all of us on that committee looked forward to every week. I know it was a huge learning experience for me. And I think for a lot of the other folks on that committee as well. It took us, maybe a year, Gwen?
No, John, it took us close to 2.5 years.
2.5.
Yes, to get
it was a while.
Yes, it was a while. Yes.
But how exciting it was on that hot August day to go out on 22nd Street and see those all of those trail markers up and have it dedicated. It was like the fruition of a labor of love. And it was a wonderful day. A very significant day in St. Pete history, I think. Hadn't been written about in that respect yet, but I think it will be someday.
And we had a great group of people. Some of them, Ray Arsenault worked with us. Dr. Evelyn Phillips worked with us long distance from Connecticut. She wrote her doctoral dissertation about the gas plant area. A lot of the people who worked with us were descendants of some of the people who are on those markers. Like Betty Harden was the granddaughter of Sidney Harden. And so we had, and she also helped to desegregate Spa Beach. So we had a lot. Tina Middleton was on our committee. We just had this great group of dedicated people that John talked about. And then the community responded overwhelmingly to our requests for pictures, for any artifact, for invitations, for stories, anything to make our trail complete. And so it was just a wonderful learning experience, and we're still learning.
We're Gwen, and maybe Nicole, you were going to ask about this, but Gwen, you could talk about the next phase of the Heritage Association's project.
Yes,
I think it's really exciting.
It is. And when we were planning this, we had one person, and I'm going to call her name because it needs to be called. And her name is Dorothy Whitlock. And Dorothy would come to our meetings, and all she said was, "Don't forget Methodist Town." That's all she said. She didn't do any work. She didn't contribute anything except don't forget Methodist Town. And we promised her we wouldn't. She's not in good physical health now. I'm not even sure she's aware that we're beginning work. But Methodist Town is our next phase because it's actually the oldest church, Black church in St. Pete. It's Bethlehem Me, and it's 125 years old, and Methodist Town got its name from there. But this is the time to give a shout out to Nicole, because Nicole's, was it dissertation or thesis? What was it, Nicole?
They call it an applied research project.
Her applied research project was about Methodist Town. And she wanted to do that, and that's jump starting us. So she has a Methodist Town website already up. And that's like our first step. So we feel like we're working. We're already on the way. She did an incredible job. I helped identify some people. She interviewed Goliath Davis and many people who grew up there. She did it in the Bethlehem Church with some of her students. And I just can't thank her enough for the work that she's already started doing. Half of our work is already done as it relates to the trail because of Nicole. But that's our phase 2.
Gwen, I was thinking that there might be some people that are signed into this Zoom meeting that might not know where Methodist Town is. Could you talk about that a little?
No, you can talk about that, John.
Okay, well, Methodist Town was interesting because it was the only large African-American community on the north side. And I'm kind of approximating here when I talk about these borders, but I feel like it went from the west side of 9th Street, now Martin Luther King Street, 9th Street, over to about 12th or 13th Street. And it was between the north side of, let's say, 1st Avenue North up to about 4th or 5th Avenue North. Is that about right, Gwen?
Yes, John.
Yeah, okay. Interestingly enough, there's another African-American settlement that actually may have been integrated, and very few people know about it, and we're still looking for it. It was out just west of 34th Street North, around, let's say, 7th Avenue.
Yes.
And it seemed to grow up around a church, and maybe in the mid 1920s started growing, and it was just a very small community, maybe 8 or 10 addresses there. And it lasted until about the mid 1950s, I think, didn't it, Gwen?
I think so.
But I don't know if it has a name or how it developed over the years and why people moved away from it. So there's still a little mystery for us to work on.
Yes.
Great, thanks. I put the Methodist Town website in the chat for anyone who's interested in learning more about Methodist Town. I wanted to go back to the book really quickly, and there's a small paragraph about each of the 4 prominent African-American neighborhoods in St. Petersburg. I don't want to read them all. I wonder if Miss Gwen will help me.
Okay.
I'd like to read it. Yes, ma'am. It is page 29.
Okay.
Is where it starts. And because you lived in Peppertown. I'd like you to read Peppertown.
I lived in the gas plant area, which wasn't actually Peppertown, and John Cooper's quarters turned into the gas plant area. So I was more in Cooper's quarters. I was on Sugar
Okay.
Hill. I grew
Sugar
up
Hill,
on Sugar
that's
Hill.
right.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll read Peppertown. You can
Okay.
read gas plant.
Okay.
And then we'll just kind of go through each, I guess. Peppertown was situated just east of 9th Street, now Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Street, along 3rd and 4th Avenue South. It was St. Petersburg's first Black community, established when the railroad arrived in 1888. All the original housing stock is gone, although some dwellings from the 1930s and 1940s remain. In the late 20th century, the area became a diversely populated section of the greater downtown area. By 2006, condominiums had sprouted and further redevelopment is likely. Few single-family homes are left. And then next is Methodist Town. Miss Gwen, do you want me to read that one?
Or John, do you have the book with you?
I'd have to go fetch it in my bookcase here. So
Why
either
don't
one of
you
you
fetch
maybe.
it while I read the gas plant neighborhood?
Okay.
The gas plant area west of 9th Street between 1st and 5th Avenue South was so named because of the two imposing natural gas storage cylinders that towered over the neighborhood. Among its first residents were African-American railroad workers who took up residence along 1st Avenue South, originally called Railroad Avenue. Gradually, the neighborhood spread south, even spilling over 5th Avenue South into the Campbell Park area. Like Methodist Town, the gas plant boasted its own business section. The self-contained neighborhood also boasted the Harlem Theater, numerous churches, and 2 schools, Davis Academy and the privately operated McRae School. And I actually attended that privately operated McRae School until it closed the Christmas break of my 3rd grade year. And John is back now to read Methodist Town. You have the
Methodist
page?
Town.
Okay.
I do indeed. Methodist Town was located west of 9th Street between Arlington and 5th Avenues North. It began developing about 1894 around the Bethel AME Church, a landmark that is one of the few Methodist Town structures remaining. Methodist Town had its own small business district and a widely known hotel called the Robert James, which accommodated Black entertainers and athletes and boasted a restaurant, ballroom, and frequent entertainment.
Great. Okay. Then we have 22nd Street South. I'll read it, but do you guys want to, one of you?
Oh, we can talk about it.
Okay, let's talk about it.
So let's talk about it. 22nd Street was the Black Central Avenue. We were so restricted when we went downtown. In some of the stores, we could buy the clothes, but we couldn't try them on. We could buy the shoes, but we couldn't try them on. We couldn't sit down at the soda fountains and eat. So we weren't treated with respect. Our money was respected, but we were not. But on 22nd Street, we could go there. There were restaurants, like I read in the poem. At one time, there were 111 thriving Black-owned, Black-operated, and Jewish-owned businesses in 10 blocks area from 5th Avenue to 15th Avenue. Imagine that, 111 thriving businesses, and that was in the early 60s. So we could almost get everything we wanted, food, fried chicken gives us at Snow Peaks Drive-In. We could hear music at the Manhattan Casino. Oh my goodness, it was incredible. And as a child, I was too young to go there. But this was before air conditioning, and they were on the top floor, so the windows would be open. So those of us underage would go to Snow Peak Theater, get our chicken gizzards, our soft drinks, sit on top of the hood of the cars, and listen to all of those people: B.B. King, Lena Horne, Sarah Vaughan, help me, John, it just Mahalia Jackson. Just there is no one, John, is there? I don't think
Ray
there's
Charles. Ray Charles.
Ray Charles, and Ray Charles wrote a song. What did he write, John?
He wrote the St. Pete, Florida Blues.
Yes. It's not much of a song, not really, but
Nope.
but it bears our name, and he wrote it. So every genre of music, jazz, blues, R&B, gospel, everybody who was anybody played there. Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway. I mean, there was Dinah Washington, Ella Fitzgerald. The list just goes on and on and on. But they closed before I was old enough to go there. But it wasn't just about businesses. It was the heart of the Black community. It was all of our doctors and dentists. We had 2 pharmacies, our hospital, all of that was on 22nd Street, but so was the SNCC office, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That office was across the street from the Manhattan Casino. And Stokely Carmichael, the national president of SNCC, came to St. Petersburg about 1967 when Joe Walla Omali Yeshitela was jailed for tearing a racist mural off the wall of City Hall, and he was president of the local SNCC chapter. Stokely Carmichael came to St. Petersburg, stood on a car, hood of a car in Snow Peak's parking lot with a bullhorn and addressed a crowd of Black and white people talking about civil rights and the wrongful incarceration of Joe Walla. The sanitation strikers met every morning over at what's now the Carter G. Woodson Museum. And they left, John, didn't they? And marched down 22nd Street going to City Hall. So you take over, John. I can go on and on because I love 22nd Street.
Well, where do we want to go from there? I remember the Royal Theater to a degree, but I remember it mostly after the theater closed and it became a boys and girls club for a while. And I remember going there just kind of I was still working for the newspaper then, but I like to go to 22nd Street and I like to go to the Royal Theater, meet the kids, watch them play basketball, talk to the coaches and so forth. And just get a feel for what life was like. Let's see, can't forget Mercy Hospital. Yes. You mentioned Sydney Harden, Betty Harden's, was that her?
That was her grandfather. It was her grandfather, yes.
It was her grandfather, and he had a grocery store there on 9th Avenue South and 22nd Street. And I think you could go in there and buy a chocolate chip cookie for a penny. Is that right, Gwen?
Or you could buy pickled pigfoot or anything else you want. And it's in the same location for those of you. This may bring it into context. Chief Creole's Cafe is in that same spot now. And, there's so many stories about Sidney Harden. They said he was, he was a bookie, I guess you could say. Back in the day, they used to play Bolita, which was a form of gambling. And so he did that. But one of the stories we found in our research, and Kimberly and Amy found it from a Canadian newspaper, where this colored man in St. Petersburg had applied for a license to grow a certain kind of animal that was food. And those of you who've gone on the tour, you know this, you've heard this story. He wanted to grow this because his customers always wanted this particular meat and it was very difficult to get. And so he decided he wanted to apply for a license to actually raise these animals. And he didn't get it. And but I tell you what it was, I won't ask you to guess, but it was possum. because a lot of the people who came here came from very rural parts of the South, and oftentimes they would go out and hunt and trap their own animals. And so there was this taste for what I call this exotic cuisine, and it was possum, and you couldn't trap enough. So he decided, let me apply for a license so I could raise them. But there's a story about him that's incredible. It showed the village concept in which I was raised. It speaks of the unity and community. It is said that Sidney Harden said that no one who came into his store would ever leave hungry just because they had no money. So it said that he would give them bread, milk, eggs, whatever, and they signed an IOU so that when they had the money, they could come back and pay for it. And if they couldn't pay for it, they could work it off in the store. So that's the kind of community we're talking about. That's the kind of love and togetherness and unity and support. That's what got us over during Jim Crow, when we were faced with racism and segregation every day, when we stepped out of our communities. That's what we had within our communities that gave us the strength, the courage, the resiliency, and the will to keep on keeping on and making this a better place, which now we're questioning, is it really? Okay, I probably shouldn't have thrown that last part in. That was my personal opinion. But John, there were some other things on 22nd Street. What else?
Glenn, I can't think of 22nd Street without thinking of the doctors and the dentists who worked there. And immediately I think of Dr. Bob Swain, who is a dentist. He pushed the red line further south.
Yes.
It used to be that the community was hemmed in between 5th Avenue and 15th Avenue South. And Dr. Swain built his practice right south of 15th Avenue South. He broke that red line, and then he built some apartments as well. And I think it wasn't long after that, Gwen, I don't know the exact year, but then Dr. Fred Alsop set up a practice on 22nd Street at about 17th Avenue South, pushing that line a little bit further still.
Yes.
And I always think of the story about Dr. Wimbish and the swimming pool. Gwen, you might want to talk about that.
I will. And what I want to say to everybody was that was in the city charter, that Black people could not live south of 5th Avenue. That just wasn't like the green benches. There was no written law, but it was enforced anyway. You knew you couldn't sit on the green benches, but that boundary was written in the city charter. And when you look at our marker, you will see a copy of that. And so he actually sued the city, but they gave in to him before the suit went through and allowed him to build his office. And we're going to come back to him. But I'll go to Dr. Wimbish, who moved about 10 blocks west on 15th Avenue. And this was really sort of prior to the real ability to live south of 15th Avenue. And I have to say, my parents built their first home on 32nd Street and 16th Avenue South. And if it wasn't for Dr. Wimbish, that would not have opened up for my parents to do, if not for Dr. Swain. But Dr. Wimbish was building this beautiful home with the first swimming pool of any Black person in St. Petersburg. The way his property was platted, it faced 15th Avenue looking south onto this part of the other side where we were not really supposed to live. So the city changed the platting on his property so the front of his house would not face 15th Avenue, but would face west on what was Fargo Street. I grew up 2 blocks away. And so what he said was, okay, this is how Black folk got over. We got over with humor and with cynicism and everything else. So he said, okay, I'll fix y'all. So he put his swimming pool and built this high, I don't know, 6 foot, 8 foot brick wall facing 15th Avenue. So you wouldn't let my house face 15th Avenue? Well, here's my backside. Here's my pool and the back wall around my pool. So here you go. And so, but that's what we did. We had to. Racism is so irrational that you can't always deal with it rationally. You have to find other ways. And human cynicism was one of the ways we got over. But John, go back and Nicole, I don't want us to leave out Tropicana Field, but John, go back and let us talk about what Bob Swain did when he built the apartment to house the baseball players and why he had to do that.
Well, St. Petersburg, as y'all probably know, has always been a big spring training area. Back in the 50s and the 40s and into the early 60s, the New York Yankees and the St. Louis Cardinals trained here. But segregation ruled. And so the Black players on these teams could not stay in the same hotel as their white counterparts did. So Dr. Swain built the apartments partly to house the Black baseball players. He also, in that Robert James Hotel that we mentioned earlier, he put up some of the players there also. But it got to the point where Dr. Swain and some of the others, I think Dr. Wimbish among them, and maybe Dr. Alsop was involved too. They got together and said, you know what? By doing this, by building this temporary housing for the Black ball players, we're really furthering segregation here. And so we're not going to do it anymore. And that upset quite a few of the establishment people in downtown St. Pete. Some of the hoteliers still said they would not accept Black ball players. And a lot of folks say that's the reason that the New York Yankees switched their spring training from St. Petersburg to Fort Lauderdale. That may be true. I think there was some discussion about that at the time. I don't know whether that was the final straw or not, but it might have been.
Because John, actually, the NAACP and Dr. Wimbish, they actually sued the city. And they won that suit, but the hotel owners still refused to let the Black ball players stay. Not only could they not stay in the hotels, they couldn't go to the theaters, they eat dinner with their counterparts. And before Dr. Swain built that apartment building, Black families housed them. So my son knows Paul Stewart. Paul Stewart, a good friend of my son's father, his family would house ball players, and he had the most wonderful memories of very famous ball players. He had to give up his bed for them. He washed their cars for them. And so we just came around these Black ball players, and we provided housing for them. But the point, as John said, the civil rights leaders in our community said, we will not be complicit with racism. We will sue the city. Now, a story, what do we call it, John? Folklore? So let's move forward.
Sure, urban legend.
Urban legend. So let's move forward in St. Petersburg. After lying to the Black community about what they were going to do with Tropicana Field, that's a different story. Nicole may take us there. And then 2 years later, switching up and building a baseball field, which is not what they told us in the beginning. So St. Pete is now trying to get a football team, a baseball team. And John, what did it take? 10 years? I don't know how many years it took. Janet Jackson played a concert. R.C. Hammer played. They did anything, but they couldn't get a baseball team. How many years did it take, John?
I'm not sure when the first whisperings of that possibility came up, but the whole idea started going public, I think, in the mid to late 1970s. So we're talking about a 10 or 15, maybe even a 20-year campaign, more than that, to get a baseball team to come here.
And one of the urban legends was, and karma is I don't have to say the word, y'all know it. One of the legends was that by the time St. Pete was vying for a team, The National Baseball League had its first Black commissioner, and he was Al White, who played on one of the teams. And he said, I remember that city is one of the most racist cities I've ever been in. So the urban legend is, he said, over my dead body, will they get a team? Now, that's not true. But in his own biography, he talked about the racism in St. Petersburg. But talk about karma. You want a team, and now somebody you were so racist against is now the commissioner of the baseball league. I thought that was just too good. I mean, that was just great. That is karma. So, Nicole, take us to the Trop, because what happened there was an atrocity in many ways.
I do. Yes, I want to talk about Tropicana Field. I also want to be conscientious of time because we are at 7:22.
Oh.
I know. Yeah, we go to 7:30. So I'd like to give people a little bit of time to ask questions, but I do want to talk about Tropicana Field, which was first and foremost the gas plant district, one of the homes that's written about, or one of the neighborhoods that's written about in this book. So why don't you guys tell us a little bit about Tropicana Field and the gas plant district really, and how it came to be Tropicana Field?
Well, the St. Pete business establishment had been pushing for a baseball team, and they thought it would be a good idea to build the stadium first. You know, that old line about if you build it, they will come. That was part of the idea, even though they promised the community that something would be built there that would create a lot of job opportunities for people who lived in that area. That just didn't happen. The downtown business establishment, including the St. Pete Times, backed this baseball idea very heartily, very vociferously, and would not let it die. And you'd have to go back and look at the editorials that were written, but there was very, very little attention paid to the people who lived there, who lived in the gas plant area, and the businesses that were there. Yeah. They tended to talk about it in terms of, well, this is a slum. And you got to be careful. That is a terrible trigger word. We're talking about people's homes there, but that was the idea that came across. Public opinion kind of went rolling with it. Everybody wanted to knock down the gas plant area, build a baseball field. Basically, that's what happened. Some people, I think. Oh, go ahead, Gwen.
Before they talked about a baseball field, I guess to make it more palatable to the people who were going to be displaced, the promise was light industry. They were looking at building a complex that would be light industry, that would provide employment opportunities and even some better housing. I say they lied. John was really kind. I said they never intended to do that. They always intended to build a baseball field. That's my opinion. But that was the way to make it more palatable to the people and the churches and the businesses that were being displaced. And so now here we are to the redevelopment of Trop Field. And actually there are 3 cemeteries involved in that area too, that you may have read in the paper that the mayor is going to be, looking to make sure all the bodies, the grave sites were removed like they were supposed to. But now we're coming to redevelopment. And one of the things that's been so important is to I think the mayor says get it right this time because there were broken promises to the Black community in the past. And one of the reasons, Nicole, I think it's so important to have these conversations is because so many people don't know about the history. They don't know about the displacement. They don't know what occurred then. So when they hear let's get it right, or they hear let's talk about equity, or they hear let's make sure that Black folk are involved in this, they wonder why. Well, this is why. This is why. The why is because of what was done in the past, the promises that weren't kept. And in some instances, people felt that it was a good thing. For some people, it was, as you read. But what it did was it broke up a community. We lost our safety net, our support system, because people, all the people who had lived together could not move together. So we no longer had that village. And a lot of people never regained that sense of being a part of something that was cultural, that felt safe to you. So I remember a civil rights quote, what's the word when you don't, anonymous quote, civil rights. We got what we wanted, but we lost what we had. And what we had was the village. What we had was the support system, the safety net. It was just an incredible experience growing up in the gas plant area. I grew up on Sugar Hill, but my parents didn't have money. I grew up in an apartment on Sugar Hill. On one side of me was Dr. James Ponder's house, 2-story mansion. On the other side was Mr. Homer Williams' 2-story mansion. Next to him was Dr. Benjamin Jones. Across the street was Mike Ray, who owned Mike Ray Funeral Home, 2-story mansion. On up the street was Mr. Polk, who was a principal at Gibbs High School. Mr. Bill Williams, who was the only Black person who owned a business on Central Avenue, even though it was in the alley between Central and First Avenue, he was the only Black person. So that's why it was called Sugar Hill. There were many, many prominent Black people, but we have to remember, because of redlining, mixed income was all up in there together. So I was in an apartment building, but I was surrounded by all of these wonderful role models. Fannie L. Pond, believe it or not, I saw Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune as a child coming to visit Fannie L. Ponder, who was her dearest friend, sitting on my front porch. This is the kind of rich culture and heritage we had as a segregated community. Am I saying go back to segregation? Absolutely not. But I'm not saying, I'm also saying it was not all bad. There was a lot of richness and goodness in this very cultural environment that I grew up in.
Great, thank you. A lot of people in the comments are saying they don't mind if we extend the time a little bit so we can get everything in. I need to make sure, first of all, Kelsey, is that okay with you? Okay, and then Miss Gwen and John, is that okay with the two of you?
It is with me.
Okay. Sure, let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, great. And then of course, I wanted to make sure I got that note in, so I just forgot what my next question was. It'll come to me. Ms. Gwen, I'd like you to tell me, since it was your neighborhood, and we just talked about kind of the culture, the culture and heritage lost and the village lost. Can you kind of paint us a picture of the gas plant area?
Well, I painted you somewhat of a picture of Sugar Hill. So there were 2 apartment buildings, and it was 2 apartments upstairs and 2 apartments downstairs in between these mansions. But, it was not so much of the classism we see today. We all lived together. So we had this wonderful, I don't want to call it networking, this wonderful extended family, which is what our neighborhoods were. We felt safe. We didn't lock our doors. We couldn't get away with anything because we were raised to respect our elders. And if they saw us doing something wrong, they could call us on it, and we couldn't talk back. We couldn't be disrespectful. We had to say, yes, ma'am. They could even spank us sometimes. And then by the time we got home, our parents knew, and they were going to spank us again. I used to walk to school with my librarian because she didn't drive. So she would walk up 5th Avenue South, and I just jump off my porch and walk right on up to 16th Street Junior High and Elementary School with my librarian. Campbell Park was our Black park. We had everything from playing our Gibbs football games there, the Negro Leagues baseball games there. We had May Day. I planted the maypole when I was in 3rd grade. My maypole was pink and blue. My ribbon was pink and my dress was pink. And all the elementary schools would come together to plant the maypole. I mean, we had so many businesses So I'm interviewing people with lived experiences in the gas plant area right now for something else, which leads to the book that I'm going to write. And one of my accountant, as a matter of fact, I didn't know this, her grandparents owned businesses in the gas plant area. John, they owned the Red Rose Beer Garden. And I kept hearing about that, but those were her grandparents. And so we had Mr. Walker's store on the corner. There were barbershops and eating places. And McCrae, the private school, we had the Fifth Avenue playground. We had Booker's Creek that Archie and David Boston talks about skinny dipping in when they were little boys. Didn't realize the water was polluted. It was just a wonderful community where we looked out for each other, and there was so much culture. I remember homecoming parades coming down Fifth Avenue South. That was Gibbs High and 16th Street Junior High. We both, had bands. There was a candy store on the corner of 14th Street and Fifth Avenue, and Mary Murph, many of you may know her uncle, that was the gas station and the candy store, and she worked in the candy store. I used to walk to that candy store most afternoons. There are people who have come out of the gas plant area. Peggy Armstrong married Fred Minnis Jr., and he was a judge in Washington, D.C. Suzanne Carter is married to Dr. Willie Felton. We all grew up right there together. It was just, what would I call it? I guess I love the word eclectic. So I would almost say it was eclectic in the businesses, in the people, in the housing. It was just an incredible place to grow up. We didn't know we were poor. Some of the interviews, somebody reminded me about the 9-cent double ice cream cone from Webb City. Somebody else reminded me of Webb City. Wednesday was chicken day. Chickens were 39 cents a pound. But the point was, all the people I interviewed, we said we didn't know we were poor, because if we may have been poor in money, but we were so rich in everything else that the deficit in money didn't have that big of an impact on us. Now, there are some people who felt like, I interviewed Mr. Mordecai Walker, who's 96 years old. And he said to me, Gwen, people may not agree with me. And I said, that's not what this is about. He felt that moving out of the gas plant area was a good thing because the soil was toxic. And he remembers, and he says they hauled that soil by truck to Tampa. And he said exactly where in Tampa, I'm just not remembering, they dumped that soil because there were people over there that it was being dumped near to them, and they opposed it, but it did not matter. So he felt that getting us off of that toxic soil was a good thing. And so, yes, because Booker's Creek was polluted as well. But we got what we wanted, but we lost what we had. And we lost that sense of connectivity, that support, and actually even a strong sense of Black pride. Because when you go out into a world that does not value you, that can easily begin to affect your self-esteem, as it's doing with young Black children today. But in my day, that wasn't the case. But because you came back, you were in a community, your teachers, your churches, everything lifted you up and told you how great you were and what you could do. And so we don't have that anymore. So we find a lot of Black children with self-esteem issues, not knowing their history, that sort of thing. And I think that has quite a negative impact on our children. I work with high school students. I was talking to one today, a group of them, and a comment came up about she wasn't really sure if slavery really happened. So of course that took me off my lesson plan for the day to a whole nother topic. But when you don't have someone to constantly reinforce who you are to you and how you are significant and you are relevant, and also to impart your history to you. And I have to say to everybody on this call, it doesn't matter whether you're white or Black. The way history has been rewritten in this country, none of us, unless you do research on your own and read books out of the textbooks from public school through college, you're not getting the true history of this country. There's so much left out. So conversations like this are important on the local and the national level.
Thank you.
Gwen, something you said about successful personalities from the gas plant area in Sugar Hill made me think of course, her roots were on 22nd Street, but I thought of Dr. Fred Alsop's daughter, Patty, who became ambassador to, I forget the country. Was it the Gold Coast or was it Ghana?
It wasn't Ghana. It may have been the Gold Coast. You're right. I'm not remembering either. That's awful. I'll try to look it up real quick. But yes, you're right. You're right. And so many others. You know, there were so many others. And if they didn't come up in the gas plant area, they came up in 22nd Street, Dr. Ayers' children. Paul Mike Ray, the Mike Rays lived on the gas plant area. He went on to become a gastroenterologist that, you know, just passed away recently. When we talk about our schools, Angela Bassett went to school here and lived in Jordan Park. James Meredith, who desegregated Ole Miss, graduated from Gibbs High School and spent his last couple of years. He didn't live here all the time, but he lived in Jordan Park and graduated from Gibbs High School. So we have some, and there are others. There are others that out of this Jim Crow era, we still succeeded, and we still overcame, and we're still having to do those things today. That's the part that's difficult. We're still faced with as many challenges today. They look a little different. Voter suppression looks a little different. Lynching looks a little different, but those things are still obstacles that we have to face every day.
There's two more things that I want us to cover. One is the lynching memorial, but before we get to that, and then I want to open it up for questions. I don't mind talking all night long, but I know some of our participants probably have children to take care of or dinner or something. So education was incredibly important in the Black community. And for a long time, the Black community did not have a high school. Right. And so I would love for us to talk a little bit about Gibbs and the Blue Goose. We have to talk about the Blue Goose.
So John, she was ambassador to Gambia.
Gambia, yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, Gwen, are you getting ready to talk about the Blue Goose?
Oh, well, you know what? Gibbs High is my alma mater, and to me, there is no greater school in Pinellas County than Gibbs High School. Go Gladiators! Gibbs High was, and I'll let John talk about the Blue Goose, but for many years, we had only Davis Academy. And then in 1924, they started building Jordan Park, and it opened in 1925. And so finally there were two schools for Black kids, but our education ended in 6th grade. There was no middle school or high school. So in 1927, Gibbs opened, and I won't go into the whole story about it. John may want to, but it was not built by us, for us, by the school district, not at all. The Black community asked for a building that was initially intended to be a school for white kids. And then the Black community actually finished that building. Finished building it, raised money, fish fries, cake sales. Some of the teachers mortgaged their homes, whatever it took to finish. And Gibbs High opened, and it was 7th through 12th grade. It was junior high and high school. And I think 16th Street Junior High opened in 1954-55. But before that, if you were from a upper class family, you went away to high school. My son's grandmother and aunt, they all went away to finish high school. Many times it would be high schools associated with what we now call historic Black colleges and universities. But in 1927, my alma mater opened its doors, and my greatest disappointment is that we didn't get historic designation for that original building and save it. But John, you want to talk about the Blue Goose? Because the school district didn't give us a school bus either.
That's right. That's what the Blue Goose was. It was an old secondhand school bus that, if I'm remembering correctly, Gwen, I think the community contributed their nickels and dimes and quarters and dollars to buy it.
Yes.
And it was called the Blue Goose because, surprisingly enough, it was blue. And it served every African-American neighborhood. I don't know. I don't think it was still in use by the time 16th Street got started.
No.
It would pick up kids from Methodist Town, from Peppertown, from all the communities, and take them to Gibbs High School, 7th through 12th grades. The story about the Blue Goose is that it didn't always run terribly well. And so when it came time for it to make that struggle up Sugar Hill, people sometimes had to get out and push the old Blue Goose out to the top of the hill.
Yes, that's a story that Rosalie told all the time. And the Black kids actually would pay a nickel or so to ride the bus, and that would be to help for the maintenance and the gas. And the first driver was Joseph Lovett Jr., who was the grandfather of the Lovett children I went to school with, and his great-grandson, actually Marcus Brooks, works at the Equity Center. And so Marcus loves it when I talk about his great-grandfather driving the Blue Goose. He was also a custodian at the school, but he was the first a bus driver. So, and I want to say that the Black community finished building out the building for the school. They actually bought the school bus for the school. The district did not give us any of that. Our books were secondhand, frequently torn, written in. So all of our equipment was antiquated and not good. But you know what? My son will not disagree with me, and I'm looking in his face right now. I put my 1966 segregated education from Gibbs High School above the education my son and daughter received in the 90s from Lakewood High. There is no comparison. So our equipment was outdated, but our teachers made up for it in every single way. And so I think I put my education, my high school education up against any kid. I don't care if they're coming out of the IB program at St. Pete High. What we received from our teachers who knew that education was the only way for us to get ahead, they put their heart and soul into it. You didn't play hooky because they come to your house and tell your parents. Half my teachers lived in my neighborhood. I mean, that's the village concept we talked about. And Gibbs High offered, I took trigonometry at a segregated high school. 4 years of French. I mean, they did everything they could to provide us, and no one was made to feel that they couldn't graduate or they couldn't go to college. Not everybody did, but everybody was made to aspire to that. So the education was great. The equipment wasn't, but the teachers were. I owe my teachers such a debt of gratitude.
Thank you. Before we move on to the lynching memorial, I just want to let everyone know that if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat and then we'll read them off. But I do want to talk for a moment about the lynching memorial, which we hope to have erected in November, right? Hope, yeah. Because that's the current project that you're working on, and it all ties into the history. So will you tell us a little bit about that, Ms. Gwen?
And John's working with us too. And actually he's writing a book about one of the lynchings, but the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama, as you all know, opened up the Legacy Museum and the National Peace and Justice Memorial. And when they did that, they have what they call cordon steel markers hanging, but they made two for every county. And there's a whole, I don't know how many of them out in a field, but what they wanted was for every county to bring theirs home and to educate their community about racial terror lynching. So we formed a coalition called Pinellas Remembers. Jackie Hubbard, president of ASALA, and I co-chair that commission. And we have met all of the criteria that EJI put forth. We are so pleased to announce that the city of St. Petersburg is partnering with us on this. We will be erecting it at the very site of the lynching that John is writing about. John Evans was lynched on November 12th, 1914. The city owns that property, which made it easier. They're doing the permitting and right of way. We also have a wonderful sponsor with the Tampa Bay Rays Foundation, as well as Healthy Foundations of St. Pete. So our hope was to erect it in November, when that's the month John Evans was actually lynched. The first lynching was John Thomas on Christmas Day in 1905. Then John Evans on November 12th, 1914, followed by Parker Watson on May 9th, 1924. Those are the three that are documented. We know, almost assuredly so, that there were other lynchings, but they have not been documented. And that's some of the work we're also doing, is trying to research and document other lynchings. So this is a coalition of about 70 people and organizations who have come together. We've been working now for, I think, a year and a half. The only thing that will keep us from unveiling it is if we have not gotten it from the manufacturer yet. We're waiting for the city of St. Pete to send a letter to EJI saying all the permitting has been done. They will order the memorial, and when it comes and it's installed, we will do an unveiling. If it's during COVID-19, which it will be a very small unveiling and streaming it live, hopefully with a larger program post-COVID-19, whenever, if ever that happens. But we think it's very important. I'm so grateful to John, and I'm gonna let him talk about the book however much he wants to talk about it, but it's so important to document. And that lynching was horrific. And as they took him from jail and hung him from that pole on 2nd Avenue South in MLK, right down there, as you know, right there. He was clinging to a pole for life, they say, and so you can't hang if you're holding on to something. So an unknown white woman in a car shot him, and that's when he turned the pole, let go of the pole, and for the next, John, 10 minutes or so, they riddled his body
That's
with
what they
bullets.
said, yeah.
I'm gonna let John take it over from there.
Well, I won't get into all the horrifics of it so much, but the book is actually an expansion of an essay that I wrote back in the early 1980s for Ray Arsenault's class. I want to turn the book into an examination of the personalities that were involved then, a little bit more about St. Pete as it existed in 1914. And a major theme is that they lynched the wrong guy. They didn't get the guy that had committed a murder, but they needed to get somebody out of the way because the big tourist season was about to start in St. Pete. And there are a lot of rich Northerners expected to come in, and the folks in St. Pete didn't think it would look too good if they had a killer running around loose. And so they broke John Evans out of jail and lynched him. And everything went back to normal in St. Pete, normal the next day.
It went back to normal for white people, but for 2 or 3 days,
Right.
Black people are said to have fled the city any way they could.
And they started trickling back in.
Right, because the white people went through the Black community terrorizing it, even after they lynched John Evans. And there's actually pictures of that. And eventually, Black people started trickling back in. But initially, the terrorizing was so bad. So EJI's whole piece was, unless we talk about these things, unless we remember these things, there cannot be reconciliation. And without reconciliation, we really can't move forward to peace and justice. And so when he went to Germany, and in many, there are markers in front of many homes where Jewish people were taken away to camps. He saw, that's one of the things that sort of spurred him into thinking we need to mark these places where people have been lynched, and began to tell those stories. And so we're just very thankful that we have been fortunate enough to get this far in the process, and you will know about it. We will make sure that the public knows about the unveiling, whether you attend through a streaming or some other way. I will be there virtually because I'm not going out publicly.
Great. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap up now, but first of all, I could listen to the two of you all day, so I just want to say thank you so much. It was an honor to facilitate this conversation. I'm glad so many people have been a part of it. I do want to give people a few minutes to put questions in the chat. Right now, I don't see any, and that's fine. And the two books, of course, we do have them in stock at Tombolo. So if any of you are more interested about learning this integral part of St. Pete history, you can get them from our store.
Nicole, I see one question, John. I see a question. What was John Evans accused of? And son, the gladiators are better than the Spartans any day. So John, my son, there's a question saying, what was John Wilson accused of? I mean, John Evans accused of.
Yeah, John Evans was accused of killing a man named Ed Sherman. There were actually two men involved. Ebenezer Tobin was also accused of the same crime. Ed Sherman was a photographer who was also trying to develop a development, actually, a kind of a suburb of St. Pete called Wildwood Gardens. It was out what became 30th Avenue North, right by the ACL railroad tracks there. Ed Sherman was had his head pretty much blown off by a shotgun. And the suspicion fell on John Evans and Ebenezer Tobin, but there are a lot of nuances to that case once you look into it. My co-author and I strongly believe that somebody else probably did that, probably committed that murder for which Evans was lynched and for which Ebenezer Tobin became the first legal hanging in Pinellas County in 1915. So I don't want to say too much more.
Because you're giving away the book. And
I don't want to give away the whole book because I don't even know how it's going to go yet. It's still a work in progress. Thank you very much for having us on. Very much a privilege, and always enjoy talking about St. Pete history.
And thank you too, and thank you all for being a part of this. And I love it anytime that John and I can get together and talk, whether we have fun. Whether we're guiding a tour together, which we do frequently, but it's just we just work well with each other, and I learn from him and he learns from me. And so this virtual opportunity gives me a chance to be with John in a way I haven't been able to since February. So thank you all for being interested enough in wanting to know the story.
Thank you everyone so much. Again, I'm going to echo Nicole. I could listen to both of you all night long, and I appreciate hearing all of these stories, especially as someone who is not originally from St. Petersburg. So learning all of this is just, is so important. And thank you, Gwen, John, Nicole, and everyone who is here with us tonight. And please, we would love to see you back at some of our later events. Keep a look at our calendar and make sure to follow along with all of the amazing work that's happening at the African American Heritage Trail and Association and with the Lynching Memorial that's coming up. Just incredible things happening here in St. Petersburg in a very uncertain time. So thank you all for your work.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you, everybody. Bye-bye. God bless.
Bye.